Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
All right, guys, hello and welcome back, as always, to the podcast 1% Better, episode 6, season 2, part 2 of the Sarah Abbott interview conversation. So I'll get to that in a few minutes. I do promise to keep these intros a little bit shorter, not because anyone's given me any grief about it, but I do think I can go on a little bit too long. If you don't like them, just skip forward to about minute 5. I promise to try and keep it to that duration. All right, so looking back in the last week, another very busy week on the podcast front. Recorded 2 new shows with 2 excellent interviewees, both very different, but both equally fascinating stories. Keeping it vague there, but if you follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, you'll probably know who they were. In the last month, I'd say I've got about 20 new connections that have become guests or are going to become guests. I really can't keep up. I have episodes recorded for this show and for the new show. Probably released a new one in sometime in May, late May, early June. But it's phenomenal to be able to talk to all these brilliant people. If I wasn't doing this podcast, I don't think I would be talking to half of these people. I know I wouldn't, and that's a huge benefit of doing it. And I love the fact that it's happening and continues to grow. And speaking of which, in the last week, I don't normally check it, but in the last couple of weeks, I knew there'd be an increase in numbers. And on the iTunes charts, the podcast was up to number 8 on the education charts, and that's really cool to see. That just means other people are listening, and when it's high up in the charts, somebody else might say, oh, what's that? And check into it and listen and maybe subscribe and share it out and tell somebody else, and that whole snowball effect is happening. So thanks to you for listening in there. If you do go through iTunes, maybe someday get to number 1, who knows, but it's all good. That's looking back. Looking forward, next week's episode is with Ted Dinan. So I recorded this one a few months back, 2 months back, and Ted is a psychotherapist but also a professor in UCC, and this one is a topic that I've been fascinated about for a long time: intuition and your gut, and this whole idea of your gut having actually a number of brain cells, they say more than a dog has in his own brain. I mentioned that a few times last season. Ted has a book out on that, and we talk about Ted's journey and his own career. Lots of really interesting stuff there, so I'm delighted to share that one next week. In the next few days, I'm going to put out the blog I mentioned last week, 100 days free of booze, some things I've learned. Been just finalising that, just time is of the essence, and nearly there though. And just one other thing, I put out that 1 minute Monday video earlier this week on Monday. Surprise, surprise. It's on the website and it's on the socials. It's really just 1 minute long, and I typically share or plan to share one thing I've learned in the last week, be it from a previous episode or something that's just impactful for me right then that I'm using, that's making me feel or act or be better in some way, shape or form, and I want to share it with you guys, see if you get something out of it as well. So it's on the website or on the socials. I'll put it out on a Monday. On to Sarah's part 2. So just on Tuesday I went to the Disrupt HR event in St. Peter's in Cork that Sarah Susan Manning ran as part of the People Practice group that they have established. All that presented on that on the night were really, really interesting. The 5-minute pitches, different slant, and all 1 or 2 things you could take away from it. So really enjoyed that. Delighted to make some new connections. One of them was BB Baskin, who you might have heard of from RT in the days gone by. Hopefully getting BB on the show in the near future. Somebody that has been in India for a number of years and is big into wellness and meditation. So looking forward to hearing all about that from BB in the near future. This episode, part 2 with Sarah, we focus on strategy, management, discussion around leadership, born versus bred, millennials, emerging leaders and the traits that they have or haven't. And then we touch on all those usual questions that I steal from other podcasts or come up with myself around sleep and meditation. That's really all that's in part 2. Really hope you enjoy it. Please do follow me on the socials. Share this out. Hope you enjoy it. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to having you back next week. Thanks and enjoy. Touching around leaders, I think at the start you mentioned born versus bred leader. And I know you've done research into leadership in general. Like, what's your view on that? Is there anything? It's probably a very difficult one to answer, but perspective on that?
I think there are people who are born to enjoy leading versus born to being great leaders.
Okay.
So there are people who are, I think, born to naturally kind of move towards, leading people, right? Coming up with a vision for something and helping and influencing others to march forward. Even as kids, we do that, right? I see it. My son at the moment, he came home from school and said, we've started a rock band. Right. Now, this is in the middle of rural Ireland where a rock band is the furthest thing. And I'm like, go for it. And he said, and I'm the manager. And I was like, that's quite interesting. How did you decide you were the manager as opposed to anything else? Yeah. So I think there's people, but that doesn't mean they're great leaders. And I think that's often a confusion. I think anybody can become a great leader. But it goes back to that self-awareness. Do you know where your strength is? And then are you clever enough and comfortable enough to surround yourself with other great people who will even drive your thinking even further? There's a couple of qualities in there to be able to do that. But I think if you can do that, I remember that I was hiring at one stage and for a team. And I remember this VP who I supported. He was in the business, I was in HR. And he said to me, I see what you're doing here, Sarah. You're hiring people smarter than yourself. And I remember going, you think they're smarter than me? Oh dear. And I was doing that, right? But it was kind of right between the eyes, right? And I was thinking, this is the right thing to do. But that's kind of a hard pill to swallow too. Yeah. So I do think, I think you can be born to enjoy it more. But I don't think I think everybody, there's no good or bad, right? And I think there's no black or white. Somebody said to me one day, there was an issue happened and somebody lost their temper. And I remember their boss coming to see me and saying, look, I just want you to know that that's kind of out of character and he's actually a good guy. And my view of that was, there's no such thing as good or bad guys. Yeah. Right? There's only people and context. And obviously something set off, there was a sequence of events that got him to the point that he got to. But that didn't make him a bad person or a good person, actually. So it plays both ways. Just because somebody does something that's wrong or seen as odd, that doesn't mean they're a bad leader. Yeah. It might mean the organisation needs to think about how that person got to there. But that doesn't make them a bad leader. And I think this, some people are more eloquent speakers. That doesn't make them great leaders, though. Yeah. Some people have more energy for creative ideas. That doesn't make them great leaders. So I think nobody's whole. There is no perfect leader. There's sometimes timing. Like if you take the likes of Martin Luther King or people like that, there was timing that came into those, that he was right for that moment. And there, if you take Nelson Mandela, right, he was, selfless enough to do what he did, right? So there's elements there. But I'm sure he had elements that would go on his performance improvement plan if you were his boss, right? Sure. And I kind of go back to what you said a minute ago about failing fast. It's really intriguing. So Robert Keegan talks about this. So Robert Keegan has studied adult development for a long time. And he talks about children actually quite a bit. But if you think about it, when a child learns how to walk, how many times do they have to fail before they learn how to walk? So imagine if we took that child, and let's say they could talk and they had adult cognitive ability, and we said to the child, by Friday, we're setting a goal that you'll be able to walk. If you walk by Wednesday, we'll bonus you extra. Right. By the end of Monday, though, you need to have at least crawled. Right. And we give them training to do that. And then they get to the end of Monday and we sit them down and say, actually, you did a good job today, right? So tomorrow we're going to stretch the goal. Or we say, actually, you didn't do a great job. If you can't crawl by the end of tomorrow, we won't be able to give you food the following day. Right. That's actually how our system of development works in the corporate world. So if you take a child, and if humans have the ability to go from not being able to walk, then they can probably develop as leaders, right? If they have that much ability to do something as wonderful as walking, right? Sure. So I think, I think that you can develop leaders. Yeah. No, I don't think you'll develop the perfect leader because there's no such thing. Of course. What would be the one characteristic that every leader should have if there was just one that would pervasively hit them all? It would be self-awareness. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. If you know yourself well, you can figure out most things. And it's not the know yourself well in that I remembered all the good bits. this is what I'm good, right? You know, and I agree with some of the thinking out there around strengths-based development. I get some of that, but at the same time, you have to also know the pieces, the traps you fall into, just you as a person. Yeah. And you don't know that if you haven't taken some risks and tested yourself, right? So it's through failing, as you talked about earlier, that you figure some of those things out, the ugly side. But you have to accept both. If you don't, then it's probably half a story, and you can't be a great leader with that. Self-awareness is the biggest thing.
Cool. It's a good takeaway. What would be one behaviour or trait maybe that you think typically derails leaders, or is their kryptonite maybe?
There's a few actually. I used to teach a program actually on a set of competencies by a company called Lominger, and they used to talk about derailers, where they had this study of if you're exhibiting these things, they will either stall your career or stop it entirely. Right. And I thought they were quite interesting. But and some of those that come to mind, right? But one of them in particular is I guess arrogance or ego. When you're a very senior leader, you know, I'm actually working with someone at the moment who's just raised a lot of venture capital. Right. You know, this is in the billion territory, right? Wow. So he is king of the hoop.
There's an ego going on there, hopefully.
Because, you know, not many people have been able to convince that many people that this is the next big thing. Right. So that actually is dissipating into his leadership style with people, which is, you know what, you just need to do what I said, because guess what? All these people know I'm right. Yeah. And I think that's what trips people up most. Right. And I probably say that because that's probably been one of my Achilles heels at times. So that's probably the one that comes dear to me, because it's the one that's tripped me up. Okay. When I thought I knew more than someone or some group, and instead of letting them do the thinking. So I learned that very early on. You know what? The power, and I suppose from a Myers-Briggs perspective, I'm a high preference E. So the best thinking I'll have is when I talk to others. It doesn't have to be people who even know the subject. So I think I've realized that power of people is way better than the power of one. But I think, that arrogance, the minute you think, you know, pride does come before a fall. Right. Always.
Good one. I know there was another area maybe you wanted to just touch on in your new people practice that you've recently set up. We can talk a little bit about it at the end. There's an area of business strategy that you have a lot of experience in as well. How's business strategy changed over the last while? And in this new, maybe, I think it's called VUCA word, isn't it? Is that something that's needing constant tweaking and changing? Or maybe just talk a little bit about the work you're doing in that space.
Yes, so I think in that volatile, uncertain, ambiguous world, right? And that they talk about from a VUCA perspective. I think, you know, people talk a lot about the speed, the unknown element, and I think actually sitting down and thinking about the future has maybe got a little bit lost because of being in the moment. Let's just worry about this quarter. I really believe that thought process and reflection around what will things look like in 5 years' time? And what are those possible scenarios? And building resilience to deal with the unknown is key. Okay. And resilience is that great word, right, in terms of being able to bounce back or maneuver yourself in an unknown context. Yeah. Okay. And I suppose because we're based here in Ireland, so we have a lot of regional sites of multinational corporations. So you know, those corporations, those regional sites aren't always in control of their future in terms of what that will look like. But actually, how do you prepare for that? And how do you, instead of waiting for headquarters to inform you of the strategy, how do you actually own that and influence it and think about it and think about where this is going? You know, instead of thinking about, you know, what's going to happen to us next, what about thinking about where your market is going and what that might mean for your company? So putting on the actual CEO's hat and building your strategy that way, right? Because then you're more in control and you have more resilience about that. And I see some great examples of that. I mean, EMC was a great example where, you know, if you go back 6-7 years ago, when they worked with a local university to develop the Masters in Cloud Computing. Yeah. Nobody was talking about cloud computing. Sure. This was a perfect example of a company thinking about, you know what? this is where this sector is going, and we can't see that the talent is going to exist, right? And most CEOs would talk about talent being one of the big challenges, right? But actually, you need to take control of not just your internal labour market, but your external labour market.
Yeah.
Don't assume that somebody else is going to offer up whatever skills you need, right? You don't have to do all the work, but you do have to think about what those skills are going to be, because actually a lot of the levers that we want to pull in business take probably 18 months to realise anything.
Yeah.
So if you're not thinking that far out, you do need to think near, but you also need to think far in terms of what that looks like, and then build some resilience in there about how to deal with the unknown scenario.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting angle, because like everything you hear at the moment is being in the moment and focus on the now, and there's a lot of value in it, but
which is very important.
Absolutely, but you do need, certainly in business, from my experience of what I know, and certainly from your experience, it seems like looking that bit ahead and planning where the puck is going to be. I think a few leaders we know probably have used that one, and it certainly has brought benefit and fruition to companies in this region. Yeah. And
I think there was a stat I read, and now I don't know the source of the stat, so I'll be open to correction on this.
I'll check it for the show notes and put
Excellent.
it up. Okay.
The stat was that this was about 2013. I think the stat came out. 75% of Apple's revenue was coming from products that hadn't existed 5 years previously. Oh. So basically, what that would suggest is that whatever company you're in right now, only 25% of your revenue in 5 years' time will come from what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So that's the lifespan really of whatever that.
And 75 will be from that unknown future
that hasn't even been thought up yet.
Yes.
Wow.
So there's a case for thinking about the future, and it is unknown. But the trick is not to try and second guess the future. The trick is actually to think about the unknown, and what will we do with the unknown, and how are we prepared for that, and who do we have that we can row in to help us with that when the time comes. The time will come, but the question is, how do you prepare well for it?
In how you prepare and how you build a strategy, but then implementing the strategy, is there areas that you are working on around that? Yes,
one in particular comes to mind. We're doing a talent strategy with a group, and the first part of that talent strategy is on their leaders. So this is interesting because
tying together there.
Well, the question actually came through kind of a circuitous route, because the work we were asked to do was we need our managers to think more like leaders rather than just being managers.
Right.
But when we got into it, the question was why? Why do you need to do that? I get why it's good theory, but why do you need to do it right now as a company? And they said, well, because they don't do that now. And what problem is that causing? And actually we were able to come back to, we have a business issue. Yes, there, exactly. Yeah. We have a business issue. And then when we sat with the leadership team and saying, so tell us this business issue, but is this not going to go away if we did nothing? And I'm a great proponent on asking that question. So I probably lose money as a business because of that. But the question is, if we did nothing, then what would actually happen? Maybe the world wouldn't end. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. Just let it flow. Let it be imperfect. And it might not be the biggest thing. But here's where you think, right, is what will this look if we did nothing and you're 5 years out? Are you in big trouble? Or did it just go away? And that's where we came up with this piece around, so their leaders need to be leaders for a different reason, because here's what's going to happen, that business, etc. So we're doing a piece of work there. And we're really, actually, it's kind of a bit broader than that, because we're looking at the talent strategy. What are your pools of talent that are going to be really important for the future? Which ones do you have zero skill in right now? And actually, can you take some of your internal pool that might actually be of lesser need in the future and start to educate them now and skill them to be in a very different part of the business, doing a very different set of skills. And the second piece to that is that group are asking themselves some really intriguing questions about, how long is it okay to be average in this business? And how long will it be okay to be average? And how do we prorata our investment for talent? What is the highest talent? What do we mean by highest talent, right? Sure. And do we give them more of something that somebody else doesn't get? And why would you do that, right? There's a bit of chicken and egg.
And just even spinning off that one, talking about talent, the world of millennials and leadership, have you done anything around millennial leaders, or what do they look like? Are they different to Gen X leaders, maybe, or whatever those
or
are?
Gen much before that, in my case. Actually, I was part of a study that looked at what millennials wanted from an employer.
Right.
And it was a very big study, very large global study in a company. And we were all probably a bit disappointed, might not be the right word, but it certainly was a bit of an anticlimax.
Okay.
Because what they wanted was very similar to everybody else. You know, the hygiene factors, like decent car parking space, a way to get to work, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
The areas that probably came up more was a little bit more around CSR, so doing corporate social responsibility, but also being in control, right? So no longer a case of the company decides and I fit in. It's much more I decide.
Right.
They wanted autonomy around where they work, how they work, interesting projects. So I definitely think there's a piece there around that. And I think they will move more, right? Actually, the Centre for the Edge did a lovely article called The Passionate Explorer. Okay. And it talks about some of these things where people are really now have a passion for discipline rather than a particular company or a particular job.
Right.
Okay. So my passion is people, right? And I'm not so caught up in which company it is, as long as it aligns with my values. But they will do more of that exploring. And if you think there was a study recently done in the US which said if you take people who are 55 to 65 years of age, right, their average churn in terms of job is 1 in every 12 years, right? But somebody who's a millennial will have had 12 jobs in that time.
Yeah.
Right. So you're talking about a different workforce. So this notion of retain people as long as we can. Actually, you need to turn your head in that and realize these people are going to move.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you do. So get ready for that cycle and be ready for the next intake. Maybe spend more of your time thinking about how we intake people really well and how we actually transfer skill sets really, really well, rather than trying to hold on to them as much.
Yeah, that's interesting, because obviously if they're going every 2 years, it is a cycle. There's other people coming in, so it's a conveyor belt type thing.
And there's pluses to that, because you get fresh thinking. You know, I remember somebody once quoting someone saying, if you're with a company longer than 5 years, you're a limpet, you're bleeding from the company rather than bringing something back. I don't agree with that. Right. Because as long as you stay fresh, I think you can stay with a company much longer. In fact, all your life, if you're somebody who continually evolves. But there is something great about that freshness, right? And that diversity of thought.
Is there more entrepreneurial spirit in millennials, do you think, than maybe in previous generations? Or is there anything jumping out of studies around that?
I think there is a piece, but I think what we need to do more of is bring the generations together. So have mentoring and a reverse mentoring between, maybe some of our older generations. Because I think actually the marriage of the two is where it gets really, really clever.
Okay. Yeah, the mentor-mentor relationship is something I think I've heard and seen talks on that definitely work. Sarah, that's great. I'm just going to touch on a few rapid-fire ones at the end to get a little bit more into you. And I know you talked about your, called it a morning routine, but how important getting up maybe earlier, having that set. Talk to me maybe about your approach for that. Has it changed over time, or has it always been very religious and important to you?
So I think it's very personal, right? You hear these people say get up at 4 a.m, etc. And that's great if that works for them. So I am a morning person. So unfortunately, you will hear me singing at 6 o'clock in the morning, much to my husband, who's not a morning person. Right. But I do, right? I like to get a good run at the day. I'm better in the morning. So, because I get turned with all the ideas in my head, because I take ideas from everything. So by the end of the day, I'm worn out with all of those. So that's why I would never do important work late at night. I can do the crunch stuff. Yes. That's why we're here in the morning. So I'm better from that perspective. I'm very goal oriented. So in the morning when I get up first, I'll be thinking through what are the kind of 3 big things I need to do today, right? And they're great. And that would be my first thing. Now, interestingly, depending on the day, right? So if I'm going out and I'm going to be meeting people, I just get on with it, Rob, right? I normally like to try and read something in the morning, right? Okay. And not Twitter or something, but I'll normally read part of a book. something that gives me something to kind of noodle on for the day. So like Nancy Klein or Robert Keegan or those, I'll just, and it'll be stuff I've read before, but it's just, it just kind of grounds me a little bit. If I have to do really thoughtful work, right, where I'm trying to figure out what is the real question here, I find I have to have real clarity of mind, right? So I have to be very, very present to do that work. And I just find I can do the work without doing that. It's just much harder. Whereas if actually I have real presence and I'm really in that moment and in that topic, it will be very obvious to me what we need to do. My eureka moment will happen. So I actually am on those mornings, very thoughtful about not letting anything else into my head. Okay. So I won't read my texts. I won't read my emails. Everybody will know that in advance that this morning I'm not on, right? I won't listen to the radio because if I do those, they take energy in my mind, right? And I read this study where there's a hierarchy in your brain, and the oxygen will flow to where it's most needed, but it's actually only in the morning after you've been rested that the third part of your brain gets enough oxygen to do its thinking, and that's the part actually that is really important for key decisions. So they actually say when you're well rested during the night, that's the time after that to make your key decisions. And equally though, the minute you get up and start allowing the world to get back into your head, that oxygen is taken away from that part of the brain. So I almost try to protect that, right? And I will be very thoughtful about that time and how I use that time. So I can be seen at 7 a.m. in the morning walking around the fields by my house while cars are passing in my own world, thinking. And I'll have planned, I do these kind of 20-minute bursts. So I'll go, so I'm going to do this. And I might think for an hour. I'm just going to walk around with whatever, company I'm working with at the time, whatever they've presented to me, and what does that mean and what could it mean. And I'll walk around for an hour and be very present with that. And I might stop in the middle. I do meditate, so I might do that then if I need to. And I'll just let that time just exist. And it's if anybody's familiar with mindfulness, it is that kind of non-striving, non-judgmental. If nothing comes of that hour, that's okay. I'll still have done the thinking. And then I'll have a burst of 20 minutes where I might have something to read related to this topic, which may spark another thought, and then I might do another piece. And I'll do that till about 1 o'clock without any interruptions. No caffeine.
Right.
It's really important. So, because I know the things that trip me up, right?
Was on my mind there to see was that going to have an impact, but you said none, so that's okay.
But now, on a normal morning, I'll have my coffee and I'll have my egg. But on those mornings, I won't do that, right? Because caffeine just makes me go faster, and this is
slower.
As Nancy Klein would say, it's the time to think. And thinking fast, thinking slow. That book, right? So that's what I will do during those times. But my morning routine is, and I find if I get up anytime after 7:30, I've blown it. Okay. My humour is much worse, right? Yeah. Because I think I'm behind the curveball.
I hear you, yeah.
So I'm not really good with that, even at the weekends, right? Yeah. And my son is the same, which is quite interesting. So ever since my son has been a baby, he does not get called for school or anything. He gets up at 6 and sings.
Is there an alarm that gets you up in the morning? No. I'll
naturally wake at 6. And the interesting thing is, if I say, this morning, I think it's too cozy in here, etc., right? I actually find it easy to get up at 6. I find it hard to get up anytime after 6:30. I'm then really groggy. Okay. So there's and the same for going to bed actually happens to me. So I'm kind of normally at 10 o'clock, a 10 p.m. person. And I find sometimes if I think, this is, I'm doing something really interesting or whatever, if I get to 11:30, I can't actually go to sleep till 1. I kind of miss. I just have a window for some reason, right? And it really annoys me.
I can hear it.
But it's a window, and if I miss the window, then I've kind of the whole thing goes off kilter. Now I can do it, right? I traveled non-stop around the world for years, and I got 4 hours sleep. I can do that, but the quality of what I do and how I am goes down if I do it for anything more than a week.
Yeah.
Maybe that's old age. I'm not sure.
No. Like, it's very interesting. I think something similar that if I can get up before 6:30, I'm generally fine. And then if I can get to bed between 10 and 10:30, there's a period where I'm kind of... But then if I don't fall asleep after that, it is kind of weirdly awake and thoughts are flying around and it's harder to calm it down. So it's good to know I'm not the only person like that, potentially like that. You mentioned decisions, so I find as well, ruminating over a decision, it becomes bigger and bigger, and it's very hard. And there's a quote I heard recently, and it's like freedom through making decisions, or freedom through commitment. I think one of the guests said before as well. Do you have an approach to decision making? Is there like, okay, I'm spending way too much time on this, I'm just going with it? I'd love to know something about that.
Yeah, there is a piece of that, because I can be like that. So I'm a bit of a perfectionist by nature, so often I'll wait until something is perfect, and I think I've realised over time that never normally happens, or if it does, it's taken too long, right? Yeah. So I think I've had to. I have, like, by nature, I'm really drawn to perfection. That's actually really hard when I really have to pull myself back and go, what are you waiting for? Because it's never going to be perfect. So stop waiting for it to be perfect. So one of the things I do, I think I said earlier on, Myers-Briggs, actually, I really like that tool because it's helped me understand myself a lot.
Right.
I am a high preference-y, so that external element actually works really, really well for me. So unfortunately, if you came to my sitting room, you'll see there's a patio door, and there's always a flip chart stuck on that door because there's something going on, and I'll put it up there, and I'll just draw. It might be symbols, it might be words, it might be anything, but I'll just keep adding to it for a period of time, particularly if it's a big decision, and I'll just keep putting stuff up there and keep looking at it, right, graphically. Yeah. And actually, eventually, I'll look at it and I'll go, oh my God, I just never realised that's the connection. That's what I need to go do.
Right.
If that doesn't work for me, I'll talk to a few people and I'll say, and I ring people up right out of the blue, and some of them actually have been on your podcast, who've been great to me, right? And I remember talking to two of them in particular, Dennis Collins and John Wall, saying, so, can I ask a question? And they were like, come talk to us for a day. Wow. And they gave me a whole day, right? Cool. For nothing, and you just kind of go, wow. That's fantastic. And one of my questions to myself is, how do I pay that back? But, talking to people for me just helps clarify my thinking. And sometimes it's because it's what they say and I think, no, that's definitely not the right answer. Yeah. That even helps clarify, right? Yeah. So that's my way of making decisions.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's just fascinating, the whole area. And to just touch on I kind of link all these a little bit together, but intuition then as well. Does that, how do you play with that or serve things? I was saying to you before, I think recently I definitely use a lot of it, but I was making a decision about a holiday I went on and I just couldn't decide something, and then I just meditated for 20 minutes and it just served it up, and that was what I wanted to do. I forgot completely that it was there and I took it. So how does that come into your whole
hugely
realm?
Yeah. And sometimes I have to kind of so I'm a high preference in, which is high intuition as well. So sometimes I have to go, am I telling myself a story there now? And I'll often be right. I think there's something there. There's, I'll pick up on something and think that's the story. And my husband will say, well, that mightn't be true at all. And I'll go, no, there's definitely something. So it might not be true, but I'm going to hold on to that, right? So intuition, and I think it's because, we have those layers of consciousness, and some of those layers that influence us every day, we're not aware of them. At all, right? Even if you're hypnotized, you don't get to those bottom layers, but they all influence you. So I do think, my levels of consciousness tell me something, and I'll trust it. I will trust it and go with it.
Have you always trusted it, or have you become more aware of it?
I think I've always trusted it. Probably more so now. I'm probably a bit more checked in terms of, hang on now a second, that might not be right. It probably is right, but just maybe hold it as a hypothesis a little bit longer. So I probably do more of that now, but I would definitely acknowledge it and do something with it. And I would look to disprove it rather than prove it, because I think it's probably right. So I'd be looking for the disprovers.
Okay, cool. I'll ask 3 more. I'd like getting everybody's opinion on these ones. Advice, is there a piece of advice that sticks out that you've been given over the years, from a leader, from a mentor, that comes to mind?
I think the best piece of advice I ever got was, don't compromise yourself. So don't sell your soul. Make sure your conscience is clear. And I think that's been the best, particularly in HR, right, where you're working with people, etc. I think that's been the best piece of advice. And the top value in our new business is integrity. That's really, really important to me. I don't care how bad something is, but be honest about it. Okay. So don't compromise yourself was an important piece. And the second piece, I think, was from a business leader in Apple who would say, if you're going to set standards, you follow them first. So be that role model. And I actually really saw that work there. Anything they said, it was true.
Right.
If we talked about excellence, then nobody would walk past a piece of paper in the hallway, because that was seen as, then the value doesn't live. And I thought that was a great piece of advice.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool. I normally ask a book recommendation, but we got a couple already. So maybe slant on that, a movie or a documentary that stands out, maybe that comes to mind, that you've got something from, and it can be anything.
Movie or documentary. That's a really interesting one, Rob. And I watch lots of movies. So I don't know that this movie has been the most informative to me, but it's definitely captured my attention, which is the movie Inception. Yeah. Because it just reminds me of our own levels of consciousness, because that movie has several layers of the now all happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true, and it reminds me of, what Robert Keegan says, which is actually we have multiple value sets at any one time.
Yeah.
And that's hard for people to get their head around, because it's hard enough to have one value set, right?
Yeah.
But there is no black and white, there is only grey,
Yeah.
And I think that's what that movie, that's a great example of us as people. So if you take that movie and actually put it within the container of a human, that's us. And that's what's going on for us every day, and we don't realise it.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favourite films of all time. The 4 layers, I think, and each layer, you might have like a dream of 5 minutes. The next layer, it's 5 years.
Yes.
It's just blows your mind completely. It's really cool. No, it's a good one. And last one, Sarah, maybe just, you touched on it earlier about success and happiness and the link or not linked. How would you define success, or what is success for you, maybe?
So, the words I would use to describe success are can be seen as a bit trite, but to me, success is inner peace. So it's feeling happy where I am now, for all its goodness and not so goodness, right? That's success to me, and I mean right now, this minute. Okay. So success to me is, was this good? Was this a good moment? Recently there was a lot of illness in my family when one of my family was quite sick, and that was a really horrible time. But at the same time, it was a great time, because I was able to flex to have more time to think about that person, right? Okay. And so even though that was not a nice time, it was still success. Right. In many ways. I couldn't control the illness, right? But I could certainly control my ability to be available or think about that person, etc. And that to me is success. I like the greatest example of success I have is my father. So my father lived on 30 acres. So he lived in London for years, and then he came back, and when he came back, he farmed on 30 acres. And he never really left that 30 acres because he was happy. He loved his life there. He's 82 now. He still farms, right? He still gets up and deals with cattle every day, and he still is happy. And, I remember when I was getting married, it was kind of his first big journey to the city, to the nearest city, which is Cork, where we are here. And he came to get his outfit. And as soon as his outfit was organised, he said to me, "Can we go home now?" And that's success for me. When you have somebody who, he has what he needs. There's probably lots of things he wants, but he has what he needs, and he's good with that.
Cool. That's a nice angle. It's such a unique answer, for everybody.
Yeah,
so.
It's very different for people.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. Sarah, that's been wonderful. Just to wrap up, Sarah, the new venture, maybe talk a little bit about that and how people can get in touch with you. It'd be great to hear a few ways that can happen.
Yes, so the People Practice is what we're called, and we're called that for a reason, because the work we do is all about people. But equally, we're a practice. And to me, a practice is something that is really evolving over time. So we learn from every consultation and every project we're involved from. Yeah. And then we bring that back into, we reflect on that and say, what does that mean to us? Yeah. So every week, for instance, my partner is Susan Manning, who I think you know as well, who's also a HR professional. Yeah. every week we will share what did we learn this week. And that's really important. And we write it down because we think over time we'll look back at it and go, oh yeah, that was, we should have held on to that nugget. Yeah. So that's really important to us. We kind of focus on 3 areas. One is coaching, because I do see that as a very impactful way of helping people think about where they are right now, either in a corporate situation or a life situation. I think coaching is the act. It applies to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're at work or not in work, or whether it's a work situation or not. The second area is what we call that business strategy piece. We call it readiness for the future. How are you ready? You know, and how do you build a culture of readiness, which is that resilience for whatever come what may, right? Good and bad times. Yeah. And then the third area we focus on is leadership development. But I kind of sigh when I say that, because it's not really your traditional leadership development. It's much more about how do you think about yourself as a person first? Who are you, really? And how do you know that, right? And then what does that mean for how you lead? Cool. And what does it need to mean? You know, not everybody needs to be an inspiring leader. Not every culture needs leaders to operate in a particular way. So what's really important, because you can't focus on the 50 odd competencies of leadership, right? So what's really important? So those are our 3 areas. We work with all sorts of organizations. So we have really small companies that have just started up. We have some, you know, multinational pharma companies. We have clients in Silicon Valley at the moment, which is great. And you can find us at thepeoplepracticegroup.com. That's our home. And we're pretty accessible from there, on Twitter and all those other good things, right?
And LinkedIn, I'm sure you're
LinkedIn is one of the key ones, right? But yes, so that's where we are, and we don't take all sorts of work. We take work that we think we can make it. Our values are really important to us, and if you look at our website, you'll see them on the front page for a reason. Brilliant. But integrity in terms of what we can do and what we can't do, and if we can't do it or if it's not for us, we'll tell you that. So for us, it's much more. I think we're more driven by the intrigue of a project rather than the money. Cool. That might not be a good business strategy, but that's where we're at.
Well, it's living your value, right? So it's been integrity right there. So no, that's really it's really cool. I know you'll be successful. As you define success there, it can mean lots of things, but best of luck with that. It's been thoroughly enjoyable to get a little bit deeper in lots of areas. And Sarah, thanks so much for taking the time to do that, and I'm looking forward to launching this to the world and get lots of feedback, because obviously that's very important as well.
Yes, and as you know about me, Rob, I love a good debate. Yeah. So if anything, this podcast sparks somebody's debate or intrigue, happy to engage in that. Yeah, and anytime.
And any angle that you've come out with here, if people have some ideas or different approaches, that's what it's all about, you know. Yes. Maybe we could have our first ever kind of podcast virtual debate, perhaps, you know.
Yes, or even a conversation, right? If you create a dialogue by something, you know, I just think that's really cool, because everybody learns from that. Yeah. And the nature of just talking is so wonderful, right?
Absolutely. Brilliant. Sarah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Rob.
How was that? Did you enjoy it? I hope so. If you did, please like, share, and do all that other good stuff that only takes a second on social media, but means an awful lot to me as it spreads the reach. You can get the details from the show in the show notes on the website, robofthegreen.ie. In there you can share the show out with others. I really just want to touch on 3 other quick things. 1, feedback. I learned so much from it. Without it, I can't improve. Please give me a bit of feedback, positive, negative, constructive. Would you recommend a book? Do you have any other ideas for guests? How about more video? Let me know what you want and I can make it happen. I will try. That's number 1. Number 2, sharing is caring. This year I'm making more of an effort to try and expand the reach. Facebook, there's a page and there's a group. The 1% Better community on Facebook is where I really hope new listeners go to share ideas, comments, in general, things that they could help others with. That's what it's there for. Follow me on Spreaker.com. That's the new host. I'm on Twitter, growing not exponentially at all, but slowly. So please follow there. I'm on Instagram. All of these are at Rob of the Green. LinkedIn, Rob O'Donoghue. Get in touch. Would love to hear from you. Number 3 is about support. So I'm offering a few hours a month, pro bono, free coaching to those that can't afford it, that need some coaching, that want some coaching. If you go to the website, the support page, click on the pro bono link. On the flip side of that, where you guys can support me, go to patreon.com, the Rob of the Green page. You can make a donation there. You can get access to exclusive content, which I'm adding all the time. That would be awesome. Anything you contribute will go back into the show to make it better, make it more than 1% better. Also, there's the option to buy one of those books that were recommended through the website, which will bring you to Amazon, which will get you the normal links, which will get you the books at the normal price, but supposedly Amazon will give the show a small donation every time a book is purchased, or anything for that matter, which is great. So finally, I just wanted to say thanks so much for listening. I know it's difficult to make improvements, to push things forward, to get outside your comfort zone. I'm trying to do it all the time. I hope that every listen and every show and every guest that is on gives you something to take away that you could apply, adopt and adapt into your own life to create a new habit, to make something better. Don't overreach. Small improvements, 1% is enough. And thank yourself for making the time to listen to the show. It shows you're interested in learning, improving, and getting better, even if it's just 1% at a time. Have a great day and good luck.